Hey, what's going on everybody? It's the Microphone here and welcome back to another video. Today we are checking out the Betweenlands, which is one of the best dimension mods I've ever seen for this game. However, since this mod adds in just so much content, it's going to be split up into multiple videos, with this one being mostly focused on generation. So make sure you subscribe with the notifications on so you don't miss the next parts when they come out. This video will be split up into multiple parts as always, and the timestamps will be on the screen right now. Also, there are some points in the video where I will be flying using some special armor. This armor is not part of the Betweenlands mod, it is part of my Hard Herobrine mod, which I released the beta of last week. However, you can fly with an item provided in the Betweenlands mod, and that will be covered in the items section in more detail. Now let's get on with the videos. Your journey in the Betweenlands will start in the swamp biome of the overworld, where you'll need to find a druid circle. Once you find this, you'll need to kill enough dark druids, they spawn around the circle, to get 4 swamp talisman pieces. Then you can break the dark druid monster spawner hidden underneath the altar so you don't keep having to fight them. And then you use the altar to combine the swamp talisman pieces into the actual swamp talisman. Now you place any sapling in a flat and wide area with no grass in the way, and right click it with a swamp talisman, and then a portal tree will spawn. This is your method of getting to and from the Betweenlands. However, going to the Betweenlands isn't like going to the Ender Nether. You don't want to bring any food, potions, torches, or weapons. Food will turn into rotten food, potions will turn into tainted potions, torches will become damp torches, tools and weapons will be weaker and mobs will resist them more. Additionally, clocks, maps, redstone, compasses, and flint and steel will not work in this dimension. Now, one of the first things you'll notice is that you have another indicator bar in your HUD, and this is the decay bar. This bar will consistently drop, and as it drops, your max health is decreased, and you'll get more slowness up to slowness 3. You also get a green overlay over the top of your skin. Since you'll need to start from scratch in terms of resources, you want to make sure you spawn in a good biome when you enter here, namely the coarse islands, patchy islands, or swamplands. Then you want to find weedwood trees, which act similarly to wood in the overworld, and sap trees, which give you balls of sap that you can eat that will refill your decay bar. However, if you eat too much of the same food, its food sickness level will rise, decreasing the amount of food you get from eating that item of food. Now, let's talk about the biomes. So this mod adds in a bunch of new above ground biomes along with a few biome variants. And so some normal mobs that'll typically spawn in these biomes are fireflies, wights, and rarely chiromoths. So first off is the swamplands. So these are a great biome to start in as they are full of trees and vegetation. You can find some rivers here, some tar pools, and lots of weedwood trees, including giant stumps, rubber trees, sap trees, and dead trees. In addition to the standard spawns, you can also find swamp hags, leeches, geckos, blood snails, mire snails, frogs, and harlequin toads. Tar beasts can occasionally spawn in tar pools, and anglers will spawn in the water. There's also a swamplands clearing, which is a relatively rare sub-biome whose main feature is the spirit tree. This tree will actually be covered in the mob section. Next up is the marsh, which is mostly water with scattered land masses throughout. There are 2 types of marshes, one with smaller land masses and one with larger land masses. In addition to the standard spawns, you can find peat mummies and shallow breaths. This is also one of the 2 biomes that the dreadful peat mummy can be summoned in. You can find small and sometimes giant weedwood trees, marsh ruins, and shrine dungeons. You can also rarely find white fortresses. Next are the patchy islands, which are composed of a bunch of small islands surrounded by swamp water. Dragonflies, swamp hags, leeches, mire snails, blood snails, frogs, and geckos spawn here. Silt crabs spawn on silt beaches, and anglers and lurkers spawn in the water. Silt beaches are common on the shores, small weedwood and sap trees generate here, as well as bulb-capped mushrooms. You can also rarely find idlehead statues. Next are the coarse islands, which are composed of giant interwoven roots. You can find dragonflies, geckos, frogs, and swamp hags here, as well as anglers and lurkers in the water. The islands are surrounded by swamp water and giant roots, as just mentioned. Small and large weedwood trees will spawn, as well as occasionally sap trees. You can also rarely find crag rock towers. Next are the Raised Isles, which are a new biome type just added in the most recent update. They're very similar to the Course Islands in appearance, with the added uniqueness of giant roots holding up islands in the air. In addition to the standard spawns, you can find dragonflies, geckos, frogs, greeblings, Kyroma greebling riders, root sprites, and swamp hags. You can also find lurkers and anglers in the water. Here you can find the same structures in the Course Islands. You can also occasionally find Kyromon nests, which will have Kyromon matriarchs on the island. Next are the deep waters, which are primarily large and deep areas of water. In addition to fireflies as usual, you can also find anglers and lurkers in the water, and this biome is full of crag rock spires. Finally, we have the sludge plains, which is one of the rarest biome. It is very brown and muddy. You can find sludges, peat mummies, and leeches here, as well as tar beasts and tar pools. This is the other biome the dreadful peat mummy can be summoned in. Here you can find tar pools, dead weedwood trees, and sometimes ruins. And you can also find a sludge plain clearing, which is a sub-biome whose biggest feature is the rare sludgeon dungeon. This will be covered in the structures section. Now there are different layers to the Betweenlands depending on what Y level you are at. So the first layer are the caverns, which begin at a Y level of 100 and continue until the lake cavern, which is at Y equals 45. These caverns can range from small to huge and are full of unique ores, plant life, and fog. The mobs that spawn here are swamp hags, wights, Kyromos, and boulder sprites. Harlequin toads can rarely spawn if the above biome supports it. You can also occasionally find pots down here which you can break for loot. Then we have the lake cavern, which begins at Y equals 45 and continues down to bedrock. It's very dark and pitstone is abundant here. Much of this area is flooded. Swamp hags, wights, and Kyromos can spawn here. Anglers and blind cavefish can spawn in the water. Harlequin toads can rarely spawn if the above ground supports it. Underground ruins and underground oases spawn here uncommonly, and tarpool dungeons rarely. Pots spawn here uncommonly. Our next section is the structures section. Our first structure is the Druid Circle, which, as previously mentioned, generates commonly in any overworld swamp. This is essential for getting to the Betweenlands. Then is the Crag Rock Spires, which generate in the Deep Waters biome, and they're covered with moss at the top as well as patches of lichen, and they're surrounded by algae at the bottom. Next is the Crag Rock Towers, which are large, tall structures that generate uncommonly in Course and Raised Island biomes. These guys have lots of loot, but are very dangerous. Most of the blocks here cannot be broken until the tower is fully completed. If you try to get to the top before completing each room, you'll be teleported to the base of the tower and given blindness 3 for 3 seconds. A large staircase leads to the entrance of this tower. The player will enter on the second floor with the first and third floors available to them. The first floor has a monster spawner with termites. Once the spawner is broken and all the mobs are killed, the blocks blocking the fourth floor will be removed. From here on out, a pattern appears. The fourth floor blocks passage to the fifth floor until the mob spawner in its room is destroyed and all the mobs are killed, and then the same goes for the next floor, and so on and so forth. Once the seventh floor has been cleared, the player will be able to reach the top, which has multiple spawners but also has the best loot. Once the top spawners and mobs are destroyed, the tower is completed, and all players who complete it get 350 XP. Once the tower has been completed and all players have left the top, the screen will start progressively shaking and the tower will begin crumbling, with damaging blocks falling from the ceiling. The shaking and crumbling will get worse the farther down the tower you go, and the entrance will be blocked off. This crumbling will last for about a minute after reaching the bottom, at which point the entrance will reopen and the blocks can be broken in the tower. The spawner on the first floor spawns termites, the fourth one spawns Kyromos, the fifth swamp hags, the sixth pirates, and the seventh wights. The very top spawner spawns swamp hags and wights. Next we have the silt beaches, which generate along the edges of patchy islands and sometimes in the swamplands bordering swamp water. Once again, silt crabs can spawn here. Now let's cover some trees that this mod adds. First off, we have the weedwood tree, which is most common and serves as your main source of wood in the dimension. Then we have the rotten weedwood tree, which is a variant of weedwood tree that generates in the sludge plains. Breaking the rotten bark can spawn a termite. Then we have giant weedwood trees, which are by far the biggest in the mod. They generate uncommonly in swamplands, course islands, and marshes. They are the only source of dendrothist and seeded hangers used in herb lore. You can get Dendrothis in pots, but this is the best way to get it. Pyrades can spawn on and around the trees. Sporelings can spawn on the shelf fungus growing around the trunks. Next is the rubber tree, which are thin, relatively common trees that generate in these swamplands. Right-clicking them with a bucket will give you liquid rubber, which can be smelted into rubber balls. Then is the sap tree, which is an important tree that generates uncommonly in swamplands, patchy, coarse, and raised islands. These logs are a source of balls of sap, which, when eaten, restore decay. Then are the giant bulb-capped mushrooms, which generate in patchy islands biomes, as well as rarely within underground oases. Then we have the giant hollow logs, which are found in swamplands and are made up of rotten bark. Next are the giant roots, which are the huge roots that generate in coarse islands and hold up the raised islands. They're often covered in leaves, fungus, moss, and other plants of the biome. Root sprites spawn here occasionally, and sporelings on the shelf fungus. Then are the hearthgrove trees, which are common in patchy islands. They're useful for their fuel-efficient tarable logs, and emberlings can rarely spawn on their logs. Finally, we have the nibble-twig trees, which are common in the swamplands biomes, and their logs can be crafted into edible, experience-granting sticks. Our next structure are the shrines, which generate occasionally in marshes and sludge plains. They have a single central spawner along with a single chest with loot. The spawner can have swamp hags, wights, blood snails, termites, or leeches. Then are the idol statues, which generate uncommonly in patchy islands. They have 3 visual variants, and there is a single chest with loot. Next are ruins, which are small broken down structures that generate in marshes and sludge plains. There are 7 marsh variants and 3 sludge plain variants. Next are the underground ruins, which are a variety of small structures that generate in lake caverns. You can find them partially intact, and they have 6 different variations, and you can also occasionally find pots of chance within them. Next are the underground oases, which are small caves that generate in the cavern and lake cavern layers. They have a bright patch of grass with various plants, a ceiling covered in stalactites, and a central mob spawner, which can be swamp hags, wights, blood snails, termites, or leeches. This is a good place to set up mob farms, and giant bulb-capped mushrooms can rarely spawn here. Next are the tar pool dungeons, which are small rare structures that generate in the cavern and lake cavern layers. They have a pool of tar in the center. At the bottom of the pool are tar solidified pots with loot, as well as a tar based spawner. It's advised to try and drain the pool with buckets before trying to destroy the spawner and get the loot. Next is the sludgeon, which is a rare difficult dungeon that spawns in the sludge plains. There is a puzzle to enter the below ground area. If you don't want spoilers, you can go to this timestamp on the screen right now. So at the top of the tower, you'll find the beam origin block. When it's inactive, you can see the braziers and yourself mirrored in it. The braziers will show fire reflected in them, meaning you need to light them with fire. Since flint and steel don't work in the dimension, you need to find a different way. Here, I use moss and an octane ingot. Once all are lit, they'll send orange beams towards the beam origin, which in turn will shoot out a green beam down below. Each of the braziers will spawn in an Emberling Shaman. The beam needs to then be directed at the dungeon door. Once the beam touches the dungeon door, the door will open and you'll be able to proceed to the labyrinthian vaults. So the labyrinthine vaults are a huge maze with 7 layers, with each layer having its own unique feature. To progress, the player must open each dungeon door by inputting a code. The codes can be found near each staircase up to the previous layer. Layer 1 is full of sludge worms and wormholes. There are also broken mud tiles that turn into stagnant water when walked upon, although that can be prevented if you sneak on them. Layer 2 is full of shamblers as well as the broken mud tiles. Layer 3 is filled with lampreys and sludge worm egg sacs, as well as the spike traps on the floor and walls and some more broken mud tiles. Layer 4 is full of living roots and sludge jet turrets in addition to the broken mud tiles. There is also a decoy door leading to a special room, the Barashi layer. When this fake dungeon door is opened, a Barashi is spawned, blocking your path. When this mob is killed, a small room with an ancient battle axe and loot chest will be revealed. The Barashi fight will be covered in the mob section. Layer 5 is filled with splothrooms, which are a fungus that explodes into a gas cloud that will give you blindness and decay, broken mud tiles, living roots, and puffshrooms, which attempt to pull items out of the player's hands. Layer 6 is filled with crypt crawlers. The carved rotten bark from the arches will sometimes fall, damaging the player. There is also an extra dungeon door that leads to the crypt tunnels and winding corridors area. Many crypt crawlers will attack the player as they move through these tunnels. At the end of the tunnels, the player will find a larger tunnel that loops around with some multiple entryways spawning crypt crawlers. Above each entryway is carved rotten bark that will plug up the tunnels when the vine suspending it is broken. At the end of the tunnels, there is a secret room with an ancient weapon along with some urns and bases. There are also some false walls. One leads back to the entrance, and one that leads to an armor stand, which can contain full Valenite armor. This is also one of 2 floors where sludge and fog can be collected for alchemy. Layer 7 is the final layer, and it only has moving walls and puff shrooms. Moving walls cannot be broken nor blocked by any player-placed blocks. This is the only other floor where sludge and fog can be collected. The final room is the Pit of Decay. This is the room where the player can fight the sludge menace. This fight will be covered in the mob section. Finally, we have the White Fortress, which is a massive castle that generates somewhat rarely in marshes. Most of its blocks cannot be destroyed until the boss has been defeated. So this also has some secret rooms, so skip to this timestamp to avoid spoilers on the screen right now. On the first floor, the back wall in the center room is made of betweenstone brick. Instead of betweenstone, there are some betweenstone brick mirages that you can walk straight through. Here you can find a double weedwood chest. You can also jump through the pool of stagnant water in the center, which leads to a hidden basement with some swamp hag spawners, pots, and blocks of precious materials such as octine, sermerite, and valenite. So the first floor can be accessed through small entryways in the sides of the fortress. There's 4 corner rooms, some of which have monster spawners, which can be swamp hags or karamas. These lead out into the center room, which is a pool of stagnant water in the center. The next 2 floors consist of 4 corner rooms connected with side corridors. These corner rooms often contain monster spawners. Second floor monster spawners are pyrads, the third are termites. The second floor can only be accessed through the front staircase of the fortress. Possessed blocks hide along the corridors. At the back is a staircase leading to the third floor. On the third floor, the ground is made up of weak betweenstone tiles which crumble when walked on. This can be bypassed by sneaking on the tiles or walking on these sides. The corner rooms have chests, and there is a staircase to the 4th floor at the front. The 4th floor is the top of the main fortress, but the tower will continue upward from here. There are 4 corner sections to this floor with white monster spawners as well as weedwood chests. On each side of the central tower is an entrance to the armory. The armory is essential to completing the fortress. On the ceiling of each of the 4 corners is an item cage, shooting an energy beam towards an orb in the center of the room. Each cage has a piece of the shockwave sword. The floor is covered with spike traps, which shoot spikes out of the ground when stepped upon. The goal is to get to each of the glowing betweenstone tiles in the corners and break the items cages while standing on the tiles. This is the only way the item cages can be broken. As each cage is broken, the item inside will be freed and travel towards the center orb. Once all are freed, the central orb will disappear and leave behind the shockwave sword. Now you can access the 5th room by climbing a small staircase at the back of the central tower. This room has 2 Kyroma mob spawners, a double weedwood chest, and a floor of weak polished limestone that will break beneath you unless you sneak. The 6th room is blocked off by energy barriers. You can only pass through these if you have the completed shockwave sword in your main hand. Once you pass through, all the barriers will shatter. In the center of the room is a transparent eye. When the eye is stared at directly for a short while, it will teleport the player to the very top and the boss will be spawned. This fight will be covered in the mob section. And that is pretty much going to wrap up this part of the Betweenlands showcase. I highly recommend downloading this mod for yourself, as there's still a lot I didn't cover. I will still be covering this mod over the next coming weeks through more sections, so make sure you have the notifications on. Also, if you missed it last week, I dropped a beta to my Hard Herobrine mod. Link to that will be down in the description below, as well as a link to the wiki to the Betweenlands, which is very comprehensive, has a lot of information, as well as a link to the Discord. And that's pretty much going to be it, everybody. We hope you all enjoyed. Peace out.